So with the latest patch to Warhammer, CA has introduced this new mechanic for the dwarfs known as the deeps, and if you're anything like me, you were intrigued by this because it supposedly allows you to try to adopt a more tall playstyle as opposed to a wide play style where you're gobbling up as much territory and as many settlements as possible, which, pretty much suits the more aggressive play style that Warhammer 3 generally requires, or I should say generally favors. So what I have done here is I've gone ahead and played through a campaign of Thorgrim Grudgebearer, not the whole way through the campaign. I think I played about 40 turns or so just to test out whether or not this tall playstyle is actually viable. And in particular, what I decided to do is I wanted to test out the idea of what Civ used to call a one city challenge. In this case, it's a Warhammer version of that, a one province challenge. So basically allowing myself to expand out of Karak to the rest of that province and then stop right there and fight back invasions, which are inevitable, but never actually try to expand your territory from that point. See what happens. And there's a couple of reasons why I was very curious to see how this would play out, because number one, the Age of Reckoning mechanic requires you to fight lots and lots of battles. I was not exactly sure whether or not you would be able to gain your grudges, playing a more defensive campaign. And the other thing, of course, being that when you want to get stronger as a faction, you pretty much have always had to expand. So, how would it play out with your neighbors around you being able to grow while you yourself stood still? So basically just testing out the tall mechanic versus the wide mechanic. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and show the highlights of that campaign in the rest of this video, but I will go ahead and cut to the chase for those who just want to basically get my conclusion. This is, of course, legendary difficulty, so your results may vary. Obviously, if you play on different difficulties, this is a vanilla Warhammer. This is not any of the mods that I often use in my Let's Plays. Anyway, I think I can safely say after 40 turns that playing tall instead of going wide is an unequivocal sort of. And what I mean by that is there's definitely a viable play style there to survive, but when you kind of go beyond a certain point in the game, you realize that if you actually want to win a campaign, yeah, you can't really stick with the tall play style. And I'll go ahead and jump to the conclusion very briefly right now, which is basically you can indeed be powerful, grow in power, I should say, sticking just a single province and focusing on, in this case, Karak. You can fight off your neighbors even as they get more powerful all around you. However, there are limits to how well you can do that. If you're not allowing yourself to take territory from them, they're just going to constantly reconstitute their forces and keep throwing them at you. So there's a bit of an issue with that. But then the other really important issue is that the victory conditions in this game always require you to go out and basically conquer. That or just make alliances and get lucky enough that your alliance partners end up taking lots and lots of territory. So that is extremely difficult to pull off. It's, I suppose, conceivable, but what I found out in this campaign is, yeah, I got to the point where I did not need to fear at all for my own survival, but the campaign kind of reaches a point where you just have to make the decision to go ahead and start expanding, unless you just want to make up your own victory conditions and not try to follow the victory conditions in the game. So anyway, enough said. That's enough prelude, I think. Let's go ahead and jump into it. I'll show you how this campaign plays out if you're at all interested in seeing how it would work for Thorgrim. It would be obviously a little bit different depending on which legendary lord you choose. So obviously the first turn is very, very easy to do. You just get your hero inside your army, go ahead and attack your starting enemy here, and go ahead and fight it manually if you want to. You could probably auto-resolve an awful lot of these battles as well. But in any case, if you go in, just use your gyrocopter here just feed a steady diet of gyrocopter bombs on the enemy to soften them up, and you shouldn't have too much trouble with this battle. Coming out of that battle then, I went ahead and took a look to see what exactly we had to do to get started on the deeps, and as you can see, it just requires 9,000 gold, so it's going to take a couple of turns before you get that much. And then you press on and attack and take the Pillars of Grungni. And that's about all the conquering you can do for one turn, but of course if you go ahead and recruit into your army on this very first turn, you should be able to press on and finish off the province in the next turn. And so on turn 2, it's pretty easy to just walk down here and finish off your third settlement. And you can just auto-resolve the battle if you wanted to. And of course you want to occupy Mount Squighorn. At this point, you can dump the barracks that you started out with in your major city because you now have one in a minor city and minor settlement, excuse me, and that's a much better place for it. Pick your commandment and apply your skill ups and get ready to do lots of recruiting and defending. For me, in this playthrough, in order to test out just the extreme limits of sticking to a single province and turtling and playing defensively as much as possible, I just waited for my neighbors to declare war on me. In this particular campaign, it happened on turn 14 when we got attacked by both Skarsnik and Scabbii. And it's not really a problem because you are dwarfs. You can beat the greenskins even when they vastly outnumber you. And it's a good thing because you're going to have to do that over and over and over again. I focused on building up a really strong main army with Thorgrim and then recruiting a second lord with a smaller, less powerful army just because it's really useful to have two different armies in this tight confined territory for maneuvering purposes and to try to cover both the east and western parts of your province. And it's a good thing because I was getting invaded by Scabbii from the west and of course Skarsnik from the east, kind of over and over and over again. These early levels can be kind of tricky because you have to build up your provincial economy and bounce back and forth between west and east, and in particular you have to worry about the fact that Skarsnik will probably get a Wa going, and so his armies are going to definitely be a real force to be dealt with. But it's okay, you win a couple of battles, you'll get some pretty good loot, you'll get some pretty good experience, and it won't be too long before you can hold your own. You can also use the fact that Karaza Karak is strong enough to defend itself for the most part, at least in the early game. You can use that to your advantage. And I found that I just had to be smart about picking my battles, about when to come out and attack them, and when to stay inside within the relative protection of the settlements where you have the garrison to help you out. And then when I found the time and had a little bit of a respite, I went ahead and did the quest battle for Thorgrim's legendary weapon. You want to make sure you fight this at a time when you can afford to take a little bit of casualties and you have another turn or so to replenish before you have to worry about fighting off another invasion force. For me, Clan Rictus then wanted to join the fun, and so I found myself simultaneously being invaded by the Skaven and Skarsnik and Scabbii, basically coming from every different direction. And this is where I started to learn that even when you're not out expanding, you still have plenty of opportunities to fight battles and resolve your grudges for the Age of Reckoning mechanic. So there is at least that. And so things went on like that, fighting off invasions as they popped up, until turn 23 when I finally got the deeps built, the main building built, and that opened up 2 more slots. I went ahead and examined for the first time and thought about how to plan out our deeps buildings here. And since Karaza Karak doesn't really need any additional defense here, and at least not in the early game, I went ahead and focused on the economic buildings that you can build for the deeps, and they are quite powerful, at least once you get them going. But of course I didn't have enough money yet to go ahead and start building anything, so I just started planning ahead, taking note of how much I needed to make sure that I saved up, and then after just a few more battles, I was able to go ahead and get started on them. I also had the good fortune to have a blessed monastery pop up in the Pillars of Grungni here. And then I just had Karaza Karak's garrison have to fight off another attack, and then followed that up with the beastmen appearing in my territory, and so I went ahead and declared war on them and wiped them out. And then I found myself with enough time to go ahead and fight the quest battle for the Dragon Crown of Karaz. And while waiting for our deeps buildings to finish, then I went ahead and started building up the defenses in the other settlements. Fought off another couple of invasions, and by this point I was getting close to where those deeps buildings were about ready to be finished. And what a difference they make, particularly this Guild Foundries building. This really starts to boost your economy quite a bit. And then I added this counting rooms building in the other open slot to continue to boost our economy even more. And so with those two buildings built in the deeps, we're now making enough money that we can really afford to just build up all of our settlements, basically max out all of the different buildings that we've got here. And I was starting to consider maybe even recruiting in a third army at this point, although what I decided to do instead was just fill up the second army and make it as almost as strong as Thorgrim's army. And here is where we run into the intractable problem, which is the victory conditions for Thorgrim campaign is to satisfy some of these legendary grudges. And all of the legendary grudges require you to actually start expanding outward. So I think what we've done here at this point is we've reached the limit of what you can actually get away with in terms of holding on to only a single province and going tall instead of wide. Now, granted, this is excessively tall and excessively not wide, and so certainly you can find a better balance than what I did here, but I just wanted to test out the extreme, and I think as we have discovered here, it is viable. You can actually survive for probably in perpetuity. You know, at this point, I don't really fear invasion by anybody, but we do run into the problem of what's our end game? What are we going to do to actually bring this campaign to a conclusion? And that is not something that you can currently do with the way that Warhammer 3 is set up with playing tall. You have to, at some point, eventually break out from playing tall and start playing wide again. And so just to illustrate the point, I went ahead and positioned Thorgrim in a place where I figured that the Greenskins here would have 3 armies that could converge on him, and just to prove the point here that he can hold off 3 different armies at this point. So we go ahead and do that. At this point now the Greenskins have basically no military left at this point, so we could go ahead and take over as much of their territory as we really wanted to, but of course we'd have to break our rule in order to do that. So we're at a crossroads in this particular campaign. That's where I'm going to go ahead and call it at this point. I've got 2 strong armies. One can stay back home and defend, the other can go out and start conquering if that's what I choose to do. I probably will go ahead and continue the campaign just because it's been kind of fun, but I think at this point this is illustrative of what happens when you go tall. You can certainly make it viable, but you can't really win the campaign, unfortunately. So maybe that's something that CA will decide to introduce in a future patch or a future DLC or who knows what. But anyway, it is a limitation of the going tall. However, in my opinion, it's still a real breath of fresh air that they have added this to allow us to go ahead and have this play style and make it be certainly far more viable than it was before. Anyway, that's all I really have at this point. Hopefully this makes sense. If anybody has any questions or comments, please feel free to add them down below. I will certainly check those out. And I guess at this point I'll go ahead and say thank you all so much for watching, and I will hopefully see you in the next video.